You're right. I hope you're well. So today's lesson we're going to look at Dunkirk. We've been looking at the World War II, and we've been looking at the booklet that we've been sending you each week. So this is a video to go alongside the booklet to help with your learning. What I want you to do first of all is I want you to come up with a headline for this photograph. What can you learn from this source about what we're going to be looking at today? So I want you to pause the video and I want you to spend a couple of minutes saying, what can you learn from this source and can you come up with a headline? When you're ready to continue, press on pause and press play and we will continue with the lesson. So today we're going to look at, was Dunkirk a victory or defeat? We're going to look at key words such as blitzkrieg and evacuation because they're really important to understand what happened at Dunkirk. And this will help hit our learning objectives to explain what happened at Dunkirk. Then we're going to look at a series of sources to assess, was actually Dunkirk a success or was it a disaster? To then ultimately evaluate, do you think it was a victory or was it a defeat? So the first task I want you to do is your teachers, even myself, Mr. Byrne or Mr. Bentley, should have sent out some information to you via Teams for your lesson. You will need to open up this information to access the next task. And it should come in an A4 Word document that looks like this where my arrow is pointing now. And what you need to do is you need to read through that information. And I want you to answer the questions that I'm going to put on the next slide in full sentences. And as you are answering the questions, you need to think, was this event a key turning point in helping Britain during World War II? So I'm going to put the questions on the next page, as you can see here. And what you need to do, after I move my face, is you need to pause this and you need to read the information in your own time and you need to answer these questions. Once you have done, you can press play again and we can move forward with looking at the rest of the lesson. So please pause now and to read the information and answer the questions. So what you've done, you've looked at the information and you've answered the questions. So you've got a bit of background knowledge about Dunkirk. Now we need to apply this knowledge to decide whether Dunkirk was a success or was it a disaster. So I'm going to show you a series of sources and we're going to look at them one by one. Now the first source that we're going to look at is a picture source and you need to infer what you can see and what is going on in this picture, and then you can need to try and link it to your own knowledge from the things that you've just learned from looking at the activities where you've just answered the questions. So you've seen this type before, it's an inference grid. What I want you to do is I want you to look at this picture and I want you to write down on a sheet of paper anything that you can see is going on. And then I want you to use your knowledge to try and back up your points. Is this source accurate to what you know so far about what's happened at Dunkirk? So you need to pause this again. And then when you're ready to continue, press play and I will go through it with you to see if our answers match up. So if we look at this picture and we look at this picture in a bit more detail, what you can see is the planes above. Now this is the German Luftwaffe and they are attacking the British and their rescue attempts at the beach of Dunkirk. They would have been dropping bombs on these soldiers on the beaches and therefore it was a very dangerous place for these British soldiers. They're kind of stuck on the beach waiting to escape and they're vulnerable to the German planes bombing the beaches. And what you can also see is you can see from what you should have read, you should see these small boats and larger boats. Now, there were over 800 boats that came to rescue the soldiers off the beaches. And actually, luckily, the small boats were very good because the big boats couldn't make it to shore. So the small boats could make it to shore and the soldiers could get on board. But at the same time, what you can see is you can see lines of troops waiting to get onto the ships. Okay, lines of troops, and they even go into the sea to try and get onto the boats. Now, really, the soldiers didn't have a choice. They're vulnerable from the air, from the Luftwaffe bombing them, but they don't have a choice. They have to line up and wait their turn to get on the beach. And you can see from one of the pictures of the bigger boats that they were absolutely fully crammed with soldiers. And actually, it took a lot of discipline from the British soldiers not to panic and to actually be patient and wait their turn to get on the ships and off to rescue and safety. Because in the background, what you can see is smoke. Now, as I've said before, there were bombs going off. And actually, the beach was a very dangerous place. And it would have took a lot of guts and resilience, but a lot of these soldiers would have been scared that they were going to their deaths. And there was not a lot they could do about it as they were stranded on these beaches. So what this picture does is it gives you a really good, accurate representation of what Dunkirk could have been like after looking at the information that you've looked at previously. Now we're going to look further and we're going to look at some more sources. And you need to be thinking about who created the source, who was the author, and why did they create it? Who is the audience for? And what is the main message of the source when we're going to look at these sources together? So the first source that we're going to look at is this source, and I'm going to have to move myself, is a first-hand account by a British gunner in 1940. And it says, stepping over the bodies, we marched onto the beach. A horrible stench of blood and mutilated flesh pervaded the place. There was no escape from it. We might have been walking through a slaughterhouse on a hot day. Now, what you need to do is you need to look at the source again. And you need to try and answer the question, how useful is the source to a historian finding and wanting to find out about the evacuation of Dunkirk? Now, you need to be thinking about who wrote the source. When was it written? What information does it give? And where was he? So I want you to use this source to try and answer this question. Why is this source useful to a historian? And try and link it to your own knowledge and what you've learned so far. Please pause now, and then afterwards, when you press play again, I will go over and we will explain the source in a bit more detail. So what you will find with this source is really useful because it's from a soldier who was actually at Dunkirk in 1940. It's what's known as a contemporary source. So it's really useful because it gives us an idea of what this soldier felt during and being on the beaches of Dunkirk. Now, if we look at the actual source in detail, stepping over the bodies, we marched onto the beach. Now, we can infer from our own knowledge that the Luftwaffe was bombing the beaches. So actually, yes, there would have been bodies. And unfortunately, there would have been a horrible stench of blood and mutilated flesh where the bombs had destroyed and killed the soldiers on the beaches. And that this soldier would have been true in what he was saying, that they would have felt there was no escape from it. The soldiers were trapped. Remember, the Germans occupied the land and the sea was on the other side. And until the boats arrived, they were stuck on that beach. So they would have felt like they would have been in a slaughterhouse, vulnerable to the Luftwaffe bombing them, and killing them. So this source is a really useful source in explaining how the British would have felt during this time. So the next source we're going to look at, comparing sources, is this source here. And sorry that my face is in the way. I'll drop this down a bit. And what it translates to is it's a German newspaper, and it reports that the German army has taken 40,000 British prisoners, and with another 40,000 drowned. So I want you to think about this source, and I want you to think, why would the Germans and the British tell the people different stories? So I want you to pause again, and when you're ready to play, I will go through the answer, and we will see if it matches up to what you've put. So please pause now. So what you would have found with this source is what's known as propaganda. The Germans are trying to portray to the German public that the war is going well for them. They want to show the success that they're having, and they're showing this as an article to basically improve German morale, to say, yes, keep going with this war effort, we're winning. Now, this would have been very different from a British source, and it's highly unlikely that the British newspapers would have been like this. They wouldn't want to say 40,000 British prisoners and people were captured, because they would want to keep up their morale as well. And in fact, actually, the British government controlled a lot of the press and newspapers. And actually, a British news report from 1940 would have been influenced by the British government. There were no journalists at Dunkirk, you have to remember that. And it's before the days of your phones and your technology. And it was 5 days before the government allowed any reports to be made. And even then, the journalists had to rely on what the government said. So the government aren't going to portray this negative picture of British soldiers being killed on their masses on the beaches and, they're trapped. They would have portrayed it as the positives, that we have a plan and we're going to send out and we're going to Operation Dynamo to save all our soldiers. It's not only until later that more information emerged of what actually happened at Dunkirk, because the reality of it wasn't great. And this is where you can make your judgment on whether it's a success, because yes, they did save hundreds of thousands of troops, but ultimately the British Army left behind thousands of guns and vehicles, and 68,000 soldiers were taken prisoner. And actually, really, it was a massive defeat. And Dunkirk has been created as kind of a myth that grew up in Britain. And the myth was created that we saved all these soldiers and it was a success because during the war, people needed to feel better. As I mentioned before, they needed to have that morale. But reality was it was a massive defeat. And actually in private, Churchill said Dunkirk was the greatest military defeat for many centuries. So you need to weigh up your argument. Do you think actually it was a defeat? Or was it a success in a sense that Operation Dynamo managed to save hundreds of thousands of troops, allowed them to regroup, and ultimately, eventually, 5 years later, ultimately be successful in winning the war? And that is something that you can decide and weigh up yourself. Now, as a little plenary, what I want to do is I want you to just choose red, green, or yellow. What do you think is the answer? So when was Dunkirk? Do you think it is red? Do you think it is green? Or do you think it is yellow? I want you to decide now, and I'm going to show you the answer in 3, 2, 1. Yellow. Congratulations. If you put yellow, you've got 1 out of 1 so far. Number 2. How many small ships were used for the evacuation of Dunkirk in Operation Dynamo? Was it 300, 880, or 500? So have a think. I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It was 880. So congratulations if you got that right, and congratulations if you're at 2 out of 2. Third question. What was the operation called? Now, I've kind of just given you a hint here, so there's no excuse. Was it Operation Dynamo, Operation Domino, or Operation Dunkirk? 3, 2, 1. Operation Dynamo. Hopefully everyone should have got that right, and congratulations if you're on 3 out of 3. Last one. What happened to the equipment? Was it transported back to England? Was it abandoned, like the tanks, the jeeps, the horses, or was it given to the Germans? Have a think. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It was actually abandoned, They didn't have a choice. It was to save the soldiers' lives or save all the equipment, and they chose the soldiers' lives. So congratulations if you've got 4 out of 4. Now, I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson, and I hope you found it helpful in explaining Dunkirk. If you have any questions or any queries, there's lots more to learn about Dunkirk. You can watch many videos on it. There's a fantastic film on it, and you can go onto BBC Bitesize, or feel free to email myself, Mr. Bentley, or Mr. Byrne with any questions you have about the lesson. Thank you, and have a good day.